In the panel, we have Professor Benno Ndulu, we have Gwakisa Bapala, and we have Dr. Ramesh Shah.
So let's resume our session, and we are pressed with time. And the Secretariat advises that we collapse two sessions into one. We give the first floor to Professor Ndulu, our Governor of the Central Bank of Tanzania. We'll certainly be commenting on the presentation that was made in the morning, but also provide insights on the other session that was supposed to make a presentation. So you'll give him more time, and then the rest will follow. Karibuni sana.
Thank you, Chair. First, let me really commend highly my good friend through his keynote address. He has remained very consistent on episodes. His famous articles on mountains and valleys, I remember that quite well. So my comments will be on the three parts, very, very briefly. One on growth dynamics, then on deals, or in local lingo we call dealy, and then something on product complexity, just to give a quick sense. First, on growth dynamics, there is no doubt that episodes have tended actually to dominate growth performance, not just in Tanzania, but also in the region as a whole. But there are good episodes and bad episodes. And that makes for a very big difference in terms of the episodes that we are going through now, episodes that we went through earlier. It appears in terms of growth, in terms of resilience to shocks that typically have underpinned most of the episodes, there is a much higher degree of resilience looking at the numbers now in this country. The lowest that we have done in the last 15 years, even at the height of the global financial crisis, was about 5.2%. And in the previous years, really when it gets down, we went into negatives. So there must be something that has accounted for part of the trend. It's always episodes or cycles around a trend, and it might be good to spend a bit more time looking at conditions that actually governs the character of episodes. So, you know, this country has gone through virtually a national learning through its history. We have done a paper recently which looks at all the four regimes that we had earlier on. And one thing which is coming very clear is that each successive regime learns from the previous, although it does make changes. So our DNA, national DNA, was written during Mwalimu's in terms of both high ambition, we should run while they walk, in terms of equity and focus on social justice, and also in terms of being more and more independent or less dependent on external resources. Those codes were written in, they still serve as underlying all through, but if you want, the implementation has changed on the basis of the shift. So we had virtually 20 years of Fabian socialism. It gave way to Mwinyi's, which typically, if you want, put a stop to controls without any order. So it was called Ruksa. Then came Mkapa, who actually put a framework and a regulatory framework around, the liberalization that took place during that phase. And subsequently, you had consolidation, both on the fiscal front, as well as on investment, on infrastructure, with His Excellency Kikwete. So you can see successively the country has been learning. So it's one big learning curve. And what we have found out also is that overall, in terms of performance, there has been a consistent rise in improvement. We looked at growth, we looked at exports, we looked at a whole range of other things. You do see that. And this means that it is important to take into account also the learning curve of a nation, even in terms of institutions. Quickly, on the institutions, and particularly on deals, it is very much, I think, an important new point. We have always focused only on getting the right policies and structures on the books, as if, we would be Denmark. Denmark is almost rule is the rule. But then you have a deviation from that depending on how bad you are, where there is a big difference between what is expected by way of rule and actual action. And I think there are three elements I wanted to emphasize in relation to that. First, I think it is very important to have clear and unambiguous rules of the game in order to reduce the scope for interpretation and creating rents around interpretation. Rents are created through multiple interpretations of the same rule. And those rents then form the basis, more or less, of the deals as raised. Second feature, predictability. It's extremely important. It can't be, I'm not sure what the rule will be in the next 2 years, 3 years. And the process of changing rules has also to be very transparent and to be able to accommodate all interests as one actually goes through that process. So stability of rules and clarity in the change process, or transparency in the process of changing rules, is extremely important for predictability. And the third element is actually fairness and efficiency of adjudication where there are disputes about the rule. Because that's the only recourse everyone has. And this is one area where I think is a very big challenge still. Justice may delay or may never be obtained. Disputes may not be resolved on a timely basis. That creates also a big push out for investment. So as long as sustainable growth depends very much on investment and on productivity growth, the conditions that would favor institutionally investment are, as I said, clarity of rules of the game, means also transparency for that, predictability, and availability of fair and efficient adjudication of this. By the way, the only other thing I wanted to add on deals is we have deal brokers, which is essentially a class of its own. They do arbitrage risk. They have, probably they feel they have lower risk because of connections and whatever investments they have done than the investor going directly, trying to make a deal. And rents can be actually earned by simply that differential in terms of exposure to risk. And this is a class that has suffered recently a lot because suddenly implementation has become a little tougher, and the scope for that rent and the advantage available to earn that difference seems to have diminished, if I'm not saying disappeared, to have diminished. And certainly this is a very, very, I'm not keeping to India, so you can see I've come back to the country on this one, rather than Indian example alone. So I thought it might be important just also to look at that class of brokers. And they have been playing a very critical role in mediating between investors and government, and typically taking the risk away from investors reputationally. And it is important, I think, to include in that. Let me end by the final point, which is on product complexity. It is actually absolutely true, looking at export of manufacturers. We virtually are on the simple products. The market is more regional than anything else. But it is also true that the proportion of output which is now being exported out of manufacturers' value added has gone up very sharply. I looked, the last I looked, it's almost about 46 to 50% of manufactured value added is actually exported. And that also, I think, speaks volume of competitiveness, but around that set of products. And I take that also as an opportunity to learn to compete. So who knows, we'll be pushing into more and more complex products, building on that competitiveness. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ndulu. I think in a way we understand even better now what Lan just presented in the morning. At times we wonder why we have hotel lobbies. So our next speaker then is Gwakisa.
Good afternoon. I'm Gwakisa Bapala I'm representing the Executive Secretary of the National Economic Empowerment Council. First and foremost, let me take this opportunity to congratulate Professor Land for his remarkable keynote presentation. Of course, I say that it is remarkable simply because it reminds us on the fact that institution is one of the critical components which is required for development in order to take place. In addition to that, the issue of the institutions, in my presentation, of course, in my discussion, I will just concentrate on the institution because that is the area of which I have been given by the Secretariat. Now, on institution is very critical, simply because it promotes sustained structural developments. And from the presentation, you can see that there is, when you talk of institutions, as it has been presented, you see that there is rules or policies or norms or patterned behavior of which may result or may not result into organizations. Therefore, in Tanzania, as I'm speaking from the National Economic Empowerment Council, that we have tried to make something, to make sure that we are reviewing the policy so that it incorporates most of the issues which have been pointed out in the presentation which was made by Professor Lant. But the question one can ask himself or herself is that, as a Tanzanian, where are we in comparing to the weak institutions or rules world? Of course, that is a question which I leave to everybody because that is a debatable. We can have two sides. One can say that we are in a rules world, and the other one can say that we are in the deals world. But the most important thing which I want to discuss as far as this paper is concerned is about the inclusiveness and the participations of the policies. That's why we are trying to make sure that we, as a government, we review policies. Through the Ministry of Industry and Trade, they have reviewed the SMEs policy to make sure that it is inclusive or it ensures that there is participation. Also, the Economic Empowerment Council, because it is under the Prime Minister's office, it is responsible for coordination of electric policy. We are now reviewing local content under the support of the African Development Bank and the European Union to do the situational analysis so that at least most of the policies are inclusive, that are participatory. Okay. In addition, I'm saying that the policies they are, of course, it is rules and the procedures. We have the structure in place which ensure that there is quality in formulating or in reviewing policy. Therefore, I have no doubt that the policies which are being formulated or are being reviewed in Tanzania, that they are not that standard as it is being pointed out by a professor. But in addition, in terms of the capability, which I've said that most institutions, it can be weak institution or not because of the capability. Of course, we are trying, as a government, it tries a lot to make sure that it capacitates their staffs, and if there's no capacity of the staff to formulate or to review policies, they are trying to outsource or to hire consultants who is competent to make sure that the policy which is going to be formulated is going to be that which is inclusive and involve participation of Tanzanians. That is in a brief. Thank you.
Thank you so much for allowing us to have some extra time. And then I invite Ramesh Shah.
Good morning, Your Excellencies, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm short, I hope you can see my face. Yeah, there are many things which was talked. One of the most important things was on the institution itself, and when we are talking of how to put up our institutions, which our friends from the World Bank and Mr. Ndulu talk about it. What he talked is that there should be a harmony, isn't it? You gave the example of the music, and he said there should be a harmony. Now, that's what I'm trying to look into first, that when you think of an institution, the most important, can I introduce myself further? I've been a member of the Fair Competition Tribunal in Tanzania, and I worked with United Nations in many different countries. I'll bring that later on. So, the first thing before you decide on putting up an institution is to look into the most limiting constraints in that particular area. And on the basis of that, we put up our objective. After putting up our objective, we put up our rules and laws for that particular institution. And while doing that, we must see that it does not contradict or conflict with the national rules and regulations. That is where the first step to go smoothly in institutionalization. Now, there are many areas where we have come across different institutions. There are countries which I have visited, there are many institutions, but doing nothing. And there are countries which I visited, there are few institutions, and they have been very strong. So strong and weakness is most important part of the institution. An institution which has been formatted in terms of its organizational chart, where we can contact or we can take government into partnership, it becomes very strong. After taking government into the partnership, we need a very strong negotiator. And that's why in United Nations, negotiation is very important for a particular institution. You can have a very strong manpower working at the back side of the institution, but on the forward side, you see, we need a very good negotiator for that institutions to be successful. And that is my experience. I visited many countries, but I was talking to one of my friends that one of the good examples was Fiji, where they have a strong institution with better organizational chart and a strong relationship with the government. Now that is where we would like government to come in. Very often we present excellent report, but it does not go in the hands of the government officials. And that's why when we plan so many things, the government just doesn't know what has been happening. And if we have a good relationship between the institution and the government, then it becomes much better. But definitely, we should be at the grassroots level, we should be in contact with the general population. The second thing we were talking about is on corruption. There are many different types of corruption. I was one of the evaluator on corruption, NEXCEP 2 under PCCB. On the basis of it, just a few months ago, NEXCEP 3 was launched, and I was working with PCCB. Different countries have different types of corruption. It's not just a matter of saying high level of corruption and low level of corruption. There are corruption between businessmen to businessmen. Well and good. And in this type of corruption, as the example was cited, there has been a development. But there are also corruption between the businessmen and the government officials. And that is where the government officials try to strangle the business coming up. And this is where we need to look into. Now, if we go into the corruption, because I was looking at the Tanzanian rules and regulations on various issues, why there was corruption is because there was a lot of gaps within the law where I know I can be corrupt and I know I will never be caught. There are a lot of, and those things need to be filled up by our lawmakers. Second thing is the parliament. You see, when the law goes to the parliament, you see, the parliament doesn't know what the businessmen want to know. Businessmen don't know what the parliament is going to do. I think if the lawmaking would have included some businessmen, some religious organization, all those things with the parliament, and if they had been together, I think it would have it could bring much better results. Now, after going through it, we talked of business development. And one of the most important part of the development is how the business is going to run within those different institutions. There is not one institution. As we say, there is music, there should be tune, there should be everything. Now, there are many other institutions which we call stakeholders. And if we coordinate with all those different stakeholders, I think we can do much better. Otherwise, what happens that we plan something and there are constraints coming up on the other side of it. We cannot go on blaming them. For example, government has its own rules and regulations. I cannot, in my institution, I cannot plan a policy or a strategy which is not in line with the government institution. I would rather learn what the government has got in its line and then adjust myself, you see, as an institution to go forward, it becomes easy. But otherwise, to think of government to change, I know I recommended many changes in the PCCB manual. It took almost 2 to 3 years before the laws started changing. It can't change very easily. Thank you very much. I hope we will be able to go forward in our institutional development. Thank you.
So I'm told the professor is to leave, our governor. So thank you so much for sharing your views with us here. A big applause for him. Yeah. So I think let me just thank the panelists who are basically, discussing the presentation made by Professor Land. And now it's time for reflections. And I'm inviting Namwaka to moderate.